So, starting up Access, going to my recent file, looking for section 2. There it is, AC3. If you're not using AC3, do a File, Save As, Save Database As, and then another Save As to give it the name AC, your last name AC3.accdb. Since I've already saved it, I'm canceling. So if you're using AC2, make sure to give it a new version if you haven't already. Okay, so what we're going to do in this particular database, we've already done some. We've modified our database a little bit. We've removed a record. Remember, we removed a record from the table, and we've done some playing with our vendors table. Notice it has been assigning a default value to our vendors ID as we've entered them, and number 5 is no longer there. Now, unless we do something special, we can't go back and recreate number 5 because the next thing we create is going to be a number 7. So we remove that. Now we're going to be making some changes to our structure. Let me find that page. Well, I remind you that because databases don't always have an undo, usually they give you a warning when something you're going to do cannot undo things. That's why always pay attention to backing up your database. If you're not the IT person in charge of the database, you can still be responsible for telling those people and asking them politely, hey, when's the last update of the database? Are we getting an update next week? How about we have a backup of that before we do that major change? Make that a regular question you ask your IT people. They will appreciate you reminding them, and your boss will see that you are aware of that because they come from the times when we didn't worry about backups. But you know, with databases, when we change things, we better have a backup in case we need to go back to before we made that change. We're going to learn about something very dangerous today, a mass change or a mass delete. You can do some very dangerous things, but if you have a backup, you can say, oh yeah, they messed up, but the backup, we can just recover that. So we're going to make a change to our veterinary vendor table. They spend a lot of time on that table. To make changes, remember how you go into the design of the table, right-click on the name of the table, and go to Design View. You could always do this. You could always just double-click to open it, and then switch over to Design View by clicking there. Takes you to the same place. What we want to do is provide a more accurate guarantee that data that's put in our tables is accurate and they don't skip things. They don't enter data and forget to enter a very important field such as the vendor name. We're going to make sure that that is a required field. They cannot leave entering a new vendor without there being something in the vendor name. But before we do that, we're going to modify one other field, this field called quantity. And notice when I click on each field, different properties show up down here in the properties area. So the field that's selected up there is the one whose properties we see down below. And you see some of them have the default 255 short text. But down here in the number, we have different properties here because numbers are treated differently. What we want to do is change that number from a long integer to a type called single precision. And sometimes you'll have some good help over there. Today it doesn't give us a lot of help. It just gives us some nerdy sounding things like doubles and long integers and joining and outer number. All we need to worry about here is we're making this a different kind of number. We can take decimals, and we want to tell it save 2 decimal places instead of automatic. I can type in the number 2, or I can select from the pull down list and select number 2. And what this is saying is we're making this quantity number something that could have 2 decimals after it, and I'm not sure when it would be needed. I suppose if you're certain quantities of a vaccination, where it's not just fixed number of gallons, it's a gallon and a half, or 32 milliliters, or 32.5 liters of some medication. So we're changing that to have fractional amounts. And we get a little lightning showing up here because since we're making changes to a table that already has data in it, it wants to give a little warning that, hey, do you sure you want to change things? And also, we have actually created some forms that are using this quantity field in a form. So we're making sure that everywhere, since we made a change to the type of number that goes in there, anybody else using that quantity, we want to make sure, yes, update those other forms. And so I have this other form called AC34 that was referring to the quantity field. And yes, I do want to update that form because I want it to reflect the updated kind of number there. So I click yes, and I'm done. Back in the day where they didn't have access, the database people, when they made changes like this, they had to go through all their documentation and see, okay, where did we use that? Let's find where the changes go. Now the software is doing more of that work for you. Trying to make it user-friendly. And we save that table. And to see the effect of it, let's go ahead and look at it in Datasheet view after saving it. And now over here under quantity, the numbers haven't changed. But unlike before, I can now add 50.5 to any quantity, and it won't complain like it would have if that were set to be an integer. So that allows me to enter fractional amounts. And let's just try it for fun. Let's see if I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See if it cuts it down to 2 decimals. Oh, it left it at multiple decimals. I thought it would shorten the formatting. So we don't have to change that number. That's just showing you an example of what that allows us now. Okay, so that's one change to that table. But yet we're not done. We're going to make some more changes to that table. We're going to add a new field above quantity. So let's go back to design view of our table just by clicking here. Take me back to design. And I want to insert a new field above quantity. Similar to Excel, I can right click on the field quantity and do insert. It will insert a new row or field above that word, that field name quantity. And the name we're given to that one is product type. Now by default it wants to give it short text, but we're going to do something special with product type. We're going to use the Lookup Wizard to allow us to enter a product type that's going to be a listing. So they don't have to guess what they need to type in there. They can select from a list called a lookup. And I'm going to ignore the security problem because I know I'm working with a good file, secure file. I'm going to type in the values that I want here. And then click next. And now it gives me the opportunity to make a little table of what can go in that column. And so I'm going to enter, not using the enter key, but using the tab or arrow keys to enter 3 values in column 1, VAC for vaccination, and hit tab or down arrow, MC, and SUP. Basically what this means is I'm going to have a sort of a user-friendly way of displaying what will be allowed to be chosen when I come to select what goes in that particular column. Yep. Oh, to get here, let me show you again. I go to product type, I add the new product type. So I did a right-click insert. Then under the data type, go down to Lookup Wizard. I will type in the values I want, and then next should take you to this page. And then tab through the settings of the allowed values I want to have here. So 3, VAC, MC, and SUP. Next, I'm going to let that field be called product type. That's the label. In this time through, we're not going to limit to list or allow or check allow multiple values. We're going to see how it works without limiting to a list. I can always go back to check, confirm what I have, until I click finish, and then it does the work for me. And just before we see the effect of that, just to let you know, basically what it's doing is the work that I could have done by editing this lookup page here. So rather than me having to figure out what to enter in display control, value list, row source, which really geeky stuff here, instead of having you learn how to do this, putting semicolons and quotations around things, that wizard helped you to fill that in. Now let's see the effect of this. Let's view it in Datasheet View, saving my table. And now let's go over to that column that we've added and just see what happens. It's blank now because I haven't done anything with it. But if I select it, look at that. It shows a selection box, sometimes called a combo box, sometimes called a lookup, where I can now select from a given list, all by editing my structure right there. That allowed me to have this new kind of field right there. Now somewhere they made that name a required field. Maybe that comes later. I forgot when they did that. Okay, so that was the product type. Now they would like to modify another table called the appointments table. Make a similar change to the appointments table. So I'm going to close this. Remember, Access likes things to be closed. Keep things neat. Close them when you're done, or you'll get some scary messages. This time, we're going to modify the appointments table. So right-click, Design View on Appointments. And we're going to modify this treatment number field. Right now, it's called a procedure. It's a short text that anybody could type anything. Let's select data type there. And for this one, we're going to change that using the Lookup Wizard. With slight variation. We're going to type in the values I want. This time, I'm going to change the number of columns to 2. Once I enter 2 and click off of it, now I have 2 columns of data that I can enter in for selection, and I'm going to look at that table at the bottom of page 3-22. On 3-22, they give you service abbreviation and the description. I want them both in there, so I'm going to come in here, adjust the column a little bit, and for each service type, for T1, I'm going to enter the actual description, feline rabies. And tabbing, don't hit enter, or it'll think you're hitting next. T2, and that's dog wellness exam. T3, cat wellness exam. T-4 is our dog rabies shot. Feline vaccinations. T6 is canine vaccinations. T-7, canine heartworm. Learning about all the diseases and my pets can get it as well while I'm doing this. Felines apparently can get heartworm as well. T10, feline neuter. Oh, messed up with that number there. Remember Bob Barker, get your pet spayed or neutered. Got to watch it at the State Fair of Minnesota. T12 is canine neutered. T13, 2 more to go. Oh, we get a little technology going here. Microchip. And last one, T14, K9 microchip. I'm not sure why they wouldn't let that be one, since I'm guessing the chip is exactly the same, but they like to separate canine or feline. I have to have had a whole new category for my iguana, huh? Canine, feline, reptile. All right, so now we have next. We've created our list of columns, and I click next, and I want the one that gets assigned to that field, that gets stored, will be the column 1, that T1, T2. Now let's do next and finish that one. Yeah, I'm going to leave it treatment number. This time, we are going to allow multiple values. Now let's see how that works. Now that I have allowed multiple values, now I can click Finish. Anyone need to see the list still? There's the last 7 or so. Yeah. Heartworm, spay, neuter, microchip, feline, canine. Remember, anytime you're using a wizard, until you click Finish, you don't. You can always go back and check your work. Once you click Finish, you're ready to go. Got them all in there. Okay, once I click Finish, it gives me a warning. You know, we have treatment number already in the table. It gives me a little warning, and again, the warning, you will not be able to undo this. So yes, I do want to make the change. And now, let's take a look at how that affects my entering of treatment number. I go to Datasheet View, saving my changes. Now when I go to treatment number, look what shows up. All that listing that I had entered, along with checkboxes next to them. So I can assign multiple treatments for an appointment. And instead of just having T1 there, I can actually see the description of it. Kind of handy. I click OK. And now he has, on that appointment, multiple things specified. So when I make an appointment, I can have multiple treatments. Let's go back to Design View. And remember what that wizard did for us. Since we entered a lot more things, here under the lookup, look at all those entries here. That was what I was doing. Rather than have to know how to do this on one long, ugly line, I have that fairly friendly table. Sadly, it's hard to go back and edit that unless you actually edit this. I think if you actually try to use the wizard again, it starts over again. I'm going to adjust one thing here. Don't worry about this. I'm going to make that second column a little wider. I'm going to make that 2 inches wide on that second column when it's displayed. Now Datasheet View. When I go to enter the treatment number, oh, it didn't get. I was hoping it would get wider for me. That didn't get any wider. I can see the name of each treatment as I enter that. So just giving you a taste of what can be done after a database has been created, making changes to the structure. And remember, before anyone touches your database to make an update, always ask them, do we have the backup? Before you make these changes, have we stored our backup in case something goes wrong with the change? Now, before we leave this, let's make sure in veterinary vendors, let's go back to design of veterinary vendors. Let's make sure that vendor name is not ever left blank. To do that, we set required from no to yes in the properties of the vendor name. So design view of the veterinary vendors table, double click or select yes. It toggles it to yes if you double click. Now, if I ever try to enter a vendor without putting a name in there, it will say, sorry, something's missing. and watch what happens. So say I try to enter some vendor and I'm skipping the name 123 Asbury, and I try to leave this row. Watch the nasty message I get. You must enter a value in the veterinary because I made that required. Control Z lets me go back to say, okay, I'm not starting a new one anymore. So that's what that required field does for us. We are going to do something else here in the veterinary vendors table. We're going to add another field at the last column, a field called total amount. It's going to be a calculated field instead of short texts, and not Lookup Wizard, the second from the bottom, calculated field. And this should bring back memories of that one query we did where we did a calculation. And what the calculation is going to be in this thing we called an expression builder. They give you a clue of what expressions look like. All we're going to do is double click quantity, and it puts in the square brackets for us, saying whatever's in row quantity, take that, multiply it using the asterisks, multiply it by what's in the cost row. Now, instead of having to build a query to do this, I can have the data automatically entered in the table when I enter new data. It will calculate it for me and have the data available for me when I edit or enter data. It automatically will be there. So I don't have to build a query anymore to say, oh, give me the calculation when I want to get that information. The information automatically gets calculated as I enter information into my table. Now, it is using up a little more space in my table, but it's saving me calculation time if I find this is an important number to search for. Then I don't have to spend time calculating when I'm searching through my database later on. And this may be something that Google does. Part of their ways to make their queries come back so fast that they may have done some calculations to speed up their retrieval of data. Back to design view, just to review that, that's a calculated field. There is what I put in there. Square brackets quantity, asterisks, meaning multiply by square brackets cost. So now you're becoming Access ninjas, knowing how to make structured changes to a table. Now I think I skipped over some things, and let me find where we're doing validation rules here. Let me change that field size. I lost my validation rules. Database structure. No, maybe I haven't come to that page yet. We do add some validation rules here. Let me make sure I haven't missed them here. Structure. Integer type. Quantity, format, adding a new field. We did the lookup, multi-valued. We just did the calculated field. Okay, it must be coming later. I forgot where we did the. I guess we do mass changes and then we add validation rules. Okay, time to do something dangerous. Closing this vendors table, saving any changes as I messed with that. Now, going back to creating a dangerous query. First, we're going to make it a safe query, and then we're going to make it dangerous. So let's go to Create, Query Design. This query is going to be a very simple query. On the veterinary vendors table, double click. And all we care about is looking at the product type. Pretty mundane query at this point. Look at product type, view it. I see that, yes, some of them have nothing in the product type. Others have a choice in there. Remember, that's a lookup field. Well, now it's time to make this a dangerous query. Back in design view, we change this from a simple harmless select query to an update query. All we have to do is click on the query type, and now we have made it a dangerous one. The exclamation point is there to warn you this can be dangerous. And we're going to change this to be VAC. This is where, if I run this query now, it will give me a warning. And what this is saying is, when this query is run or executed, it will look for the field product type and it will change it to VAC. Since there is no criteria, that means it's going to do that for every record in that table. Now, if I just want to see what's going to happen, let's take a look at that veterinary vendors table. And I see right now VAC has some entries in it. Many of them, or several of them, are blank. 3 are blank. 3 have something in there. So once this query runs, I should expect to see that product type will have changed. I could have entered them by hand, making the change, but just imagine I have 1,000 product types, and now I can tell my boss, you know, we don't have to spend half an hour doing that. There's a thing called an update query, and all I need to do is make it an update query back in my query design, and now when I run it, it's going to warn me. When I click the exclamation point, it will run it or execute the query. Gives me a warning. I'm about to change 5 rows. And clicking yes makes a change. And I come back to veterinary vendors, and look what's happened. All the product types have been updated to VAC. That's what makes this dangerous. And we're going to save this. Even though in the book it says don't save it, I wanted to save it as just as an example and see how it shows up over here. So I'll do a Control-S, save it. Going to give the name. This is AC326. We're going to call it an update. I'm going to call it warning. Warning, warning, warning. Warning, Will Rogers. Update query. And I see it show up here in my list of queries as a little query icon with an exclamation point. Yes? Is there something when you open that, maybe the yellow warning bars across the top that you ignored perhaps? That's not letting you change this database? It's not open in read-only mode, is it? Does it say read-only at the very top of your access window? You might have to close it and open it again. Make sure you allow edits. So remember, all I did was change it from a select query to an update query, and that's what caused it to be possibly dangerous. It does give you the warning when you run it. Was that what fixed it? We're able to close it and open it and enable edits. Okay, so I'm going to not run it again, but if ever I do, I know all my product types will get changed to VAC. Remember, if you ever want to see what a query will do, you can always right-click Design View, and you can sort of get an idea of what's going to happen. It's going to update the product type in the veterinary vendors table to VAC. All right, close that one, and let's carry on here. Next thing we're going to do is now we're doing the validation rules. Now we're ready to do some validation rules. We're going to, we already have specified the veterinary name as required. So let's go back to our veterinary vendors table, design. We can see that vendor name has been changed to required. We also want to allow longer zip codes. So let's click zip code. Right now, zip code is at 255. That's a little long. We don't want to waste space in our database because it actually does reserve that much space when it creates records, let's change that to 20. So we're changing the number of characters allowed in the zip code field to be 20. Because I've made this change, when I do a save, it will warn me, hey, since you're shortening the length of the postal code to 20, in case there is a really long postal code in there, it gives you this warning. I will be shortening and throwing away data. Since I trust that I don't have any postal codes longer than that, I go ahead and click yes, save that change. Something else I want to do. Yes. Because I've made these changes, it's warning me, hey, I'm going to be checking your table. I know it's a short table and it won't take very long. So I'm going yes, yes, check the rules. Now let's see the effect of that. I go over here to quantity, and let's just change one from 50 to -50. And now I try to leave that row. Oh, and I get a very scary message. One or more values are prohibited by the validation rule, blah, 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 set for veterinary vendors, quantity. Enter a value that the expression for this field can accept. Well, you might figure out what that means, but that's a very nasty message that nerds like to just make you feel intimidated with nerdy sounding messages. We're going to make that a more pleasing sounding message, and notice it won't let me leave until I fix the problem, changing that from a negative number. Now let's go back to design view, and let's edit our validation text. Instead of leaving that blank, let's edit something a little more friendly, like, please enter a positive number up to 1,000. A little more meaningful error message. And the word please usually calms people's nerves a little bit, because seeing those error messages, it can be kind of scary. Now when I try to enter a value after saving that change of a -50, I get the more friendly message. Please enter positive up to 1,000. Much more understandable than that value was prohibited by the rules established in the validation rules. And of course, it won't let you leave until you fix it. So that's the validation rule with a friendly message. Now, we also are lazy. Well, I'm lazy anyway. Maybe you're not. So I don't like to have to type in a default value if, like, 90% of the time the value is the same. For example, the product type. If the product type 90% is going to be vaccination, I'm going to enter a default value right here. Similar to a formula in Excel, I type equal VAC. Now, anytime I feel like entering more data, it has already filled in VAC for me, and I don't have to wear out my fingers typing 3 extra letters. I have more time to grab that pretzel. Okay, so VAC now has become the default value. We're not done with that one yet, so we're going to have a validation rule for him too. This time the rule just looks a little bit different. Could have done it a different way, but we're going to do it this way. Adding a validation rule that looks a little more complicated. Equal VAC space or equal MC, and a space or space equal SUP. So 3 things with equals in them, basically saying these are the three things I'll accept, and of course once I hit enter, it puts things in quotes for me and capitalizes the or, and the validation text is going to be please enter one of, and I'll put VAC, MC, or SUP. Now remember how back in the lookup table you could set it to be limit to list? I could have done that because this is a multiple lookup, but this is a longer way of entering the validation rule. Now I can go View datasheet view, saving changes on the way. Validation rules, whenever I add them, it gives me a warning. Okay, I have to check that everything follows those rules. And I know I've changed everything to VAC from that update query. Now let's try to enter something else, like VAD. And I leave that, and it says, uh-oh, doesn't follow the validation rules, sorry. And you can't leave that row until you've made the change. Sadly, it doesn't fix it. You have to Control-Z undo what you just did if you want to get back. It doesn't automatically correct it for you. That'd be something that would be nice that you could say, if someone causes an error, that would automatically correct. The thing is with Access, it actually doesn't do the validation rules until you have tried to leave that row. So I could have tried changing multiple things here. Change this to VAX. Oh, I guess it doesn't let me leave that column. In some cases, it won't let you leave the row until you've corrected it. That one doesn't allow me to leave that column. So there's where the validation rules help to ensure that the data in my table is kept pure. Because that is the super important thing with databases, that we do not corrupt our tables. Corruption is a bad thing for database tables. We'll stop there. Got a few extra minutes if anyone needs extra help. Otherwise, save your database. We have just a few more things to do next time and doing a little practice with your Bible database. You're welcome to take a look at the extra credit project over here in Schoology. We'll stop